All right. We are recording. I'm going to let all of these wonderful folks into the room. Here they come. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the field trip. Come on in, get settled, get comfy. Lovely to have you in the space with us. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments, but before we do, while we give people a chance to come in and get settled, get what they need, maybe come from another appointment, that kind of thing, we'd love for you to answer the warm-up question in the chat. So if you'd like to share in the chat your name and pronouns and where you're joining from, and then the first three words that come to mind when you hear the word conflict. Love to see answers to that in the chat, and we're going to get started very soon. Hi to those just coming into the space. We're going to get started in just a moment here. But while we wait for people to come and join us in the room, if you'd like to answer the warm-up question in the chat, first, we'd love to know your name and pronouns, where in the world you're joining in from. Love to see where all over the world people are zooming in from. And then the first three words that come to mind when you hear the word conflict. Okay. It is about that time to get started. Welcome to the field trip, everyone. If we haven't met before, my name is Lauren. I'm going to be your field trip support for the next hour and a bit together. And I'm very excited for what we're going to do together today. But I have a couple of things just to go over before we dive in. The first is if you have any tech issues or feedback during the field trip, please direct message me. That way we can keep the chat clear to focus on our awesome topic that is being presented to us today. Could be a little bit overwhelming if our hosts get all of those messages or if they distract everyone in the main chat. So just be sure if anything of that nature comes up that you know you can message me. That's why I'm here. And for those of you on camera, can I get a thumbs up for that? Sounds good, Lauren. We know we can message you if we need. Awesome. Thanks so much. Love seeing all those thumbs up. Appreciate y'all. And the next thing I'll say is that field trips are learning experiences for participants and for hosts. And at Creative Mornings, we like to start off every field trip with what we call confetti. It's my favorite thing in the whole wide world. And it's a way to cheer on our hosts and each other for showing up. It's so wonderful that you've set aside this time for yourselves today to be here. So there are a couple of ways to do confetti. If you'd like, if you're able, we invite you to pop your camera on. I'm also going to get you off mute in a moment because we are going to light up the screen with jazz hands, dance, and our best woohoos, yippies, hurrahs, whatever feels good to just celebrate yourselves and each other. And if camera and mic on isn't for you today, no worries. You can jump on into that chat and you can go for chat confetti. So you can choose emojis, words, whatever feels good. Okay, so you should see it pop up to unmute. I'll give ourselves a second to get those mics on for those who can. All right. Getting that there. All right, looks like we're off mute. Are we ready? 3, 2, 1, confetti. Woohoo! Yeah, isn't that so fun? I love hearing you all. Amazing, amazing. Thank you all so much for that. That is just pure joy. I appreciate it so much. Of course, there is no pressure to keep your cameras on during our time together, but as you can see, it's really nice to see who we're in the space with. And with that said, I'm going to pass to our host for today, Katya. And Katya is going to take us through the next hour and a bit together. Over to you, Katya.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, everyone. That was wonderful, and I want to encourage us to keep the jazz hands going at any point throughout the session. Body language is actually one of the key tools that I use with my company. Things like Me Too, or just snaps, or affirming people, and especially around a topic like this, where maybe someone will share something that might feel a little vulnerable. It's so helpful to feel that people are with you, especially in a Zoom space. So thank you for helping me feel like you're with me here in this virtual shared space that we're in. And I feel really honored to be here, to get to share all that I'm going to share with you, that you took the time out of your very busy lives to show up and take a moment to unpack conflict and what conflict brings up in us. And so thank you to all of you who were really honest in the chat. I see some of the words that came in that you associate with conflict right away. I'll read a few out loud. Almost stop breathing, avoid. I also saw growth. I saw challenge. I saw retreat and anger. So I hope that you can see that if you feel any of those heavier feelings around conflict, you're really not alone. It is, even the word can bring up an emotional response in so many of us. And we're going to explore all of our beliefs around conflict today and where that response comes from. And I am Katya Stepanov. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Inheritance Project. And I'm going to be guiding about 60 minutes of content today, and then we'll have time, 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you do need to leave, right on the hour, by all means. But if you want to ask something or stay for the discussion, I hope that you will as well. And of course, like Lauren said, please drop any questions that you have in the Q&A and I will try to answer them. And so let me make sure that my screen sharing works. All right. So diving in, I'll take a moment to introduce Inheritance Project, a company I helped to co-found. And we partner with leaders to create communities that love working together by building connection, empathy, trust, inclusion, and communication skills. And what is between the lines of this is inevitably conflict. And how do you help groups of people navigate tension and conflict so that everyone can actually feel a sense of inclusion and belonging? How do we build bridges between what might seem like totally disparate perspectives, identities, sides? And I'll share also, for those who may not be familiar with us or our work, what I mean when I say the word inheritance. So when I say inheritance, I'm not talking about the material objects that you inherited from your family. That's what we were all raised to understand inheritance as, like property or, grandmother's pearls, right? Or something tangible that I'm being passed down from previous generations. But if we take a moment to really think about it, inheritance is so much more than that. It encompasses our ancestry, our culture, our stories, our belief systems, essentially the glasses with which we see the world. A lot of that comes from our inheritance in our childhood and what we were learning and listening to when we were growing up, right? So we don't just inherit from our caretakers, but also from society and the media. And we get our ideas from so many different places. So what we do at Inheritance Project is actually create the space for exploring our inheritance so that we can start to see what have we inherited, so we can become conscious of it and then actually have the empowerment to make a choice around what inherited patterns or belief systems are serving us that we want to pass on in our legacy, and what might be things that we actually might shift in our lifetime or want to change or choose differently for ourselves. And I know that I'm not alone in inheriting a lot of negative beliefs about conflict and what conflict leads to. And when I think about the legacy that I want to leave as a peacemaker and bridge builder, I have to think a new way about conflict. So a lot of what this session will be about is inviting you to explore your inherited beliefs and conflict reactions and offering you a few tools, just a beginning of the 7 skills for challenging conversations, which we do teach long form. But today we're just going to dive into a few tools that I hope will help you move the needle on a real conflict that you're experiencing in your life right now. And I'm sure that you came here and were interested in this session because you are a cycle breaker or an evolutionary leader or someone who wants to be the change that you see in the world. And maybe you're done checking a box and trying the same things over and over again and expecting different results. And maybe you want to leave your world, your relationships, and your workplace better than you found them, but maybe you don't necessarily know exactly how to do that. And that's where we come in. And maybe you're joining because escalating global conflicts really brought you to a lot of challenging conversations. I know it has for me. Maybe you can't stand reading the comment section on social media anymore and witnessing people who are not able to have dialogue with one another, and you want to be part of the change and actually creating real dialogue. Maybe you're joining because you are a leader and you are put in the role of mediating conflict, right? Or managing people who are struggling to work together. Maybe you are having the same fight with your partner over and over again and you're ready to try something new. So today we're going to address and cover 3 of the 7 skills for challenging conversations. That is the focus of our Bridge Builders course. And these are the skills that we share and guide thousands of people through, from VC-backed startups to fellowship programs to nonprofits to individuals who are just struggling with conflict in their everyday lives. So what I will say before I dive in is that these skills are designed to support you in resolving conflicts in your immediate circle of relations. So people that you have real life relationships with, coworkers, family members, perhaps friends, perhaps. These are not skills that are designed to solve geopolitical issues, world wars, or any other violent conflict. If you are in a violent conflict, please seek out the appropriate support. These are not the tools to use for that situation. So I always want to preface this work with that. These are not those tools, but these are tools that can move the needle on the conflicts that likely occupy a lot of space in your mind. You know, the conflicts that you might be lying in bed, like thinking about, that you feel like if this were to resolve, or I knew how to approach this, I could improve my life experience, because our life is made up of our relationships. And if we're in committed relationships, we're likely experiencing some form of conflict at some point or another. So we're going to start with a really quick practice, actually, to help us arrive and be really fully present and maybe shake off some part of the day before we got here. And if you're comfortable, I invite you to unglue your eyes from the screen for a moment, give them a much needed rest. And if you feel comfortable, close your eyes for a few moments and give yourself an introspective break. If you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, you can find a point in front of you, somewhere that you can soft focus, and let your eyes relax for a moment. And we're going to begin with a really brief visualization. And if visualization for any reason doesn't resonate for you, you can just listen to my words and reflect on what I'm saying. So we'll start by just taking a few deep breaths, taking a deep inhale into the nose, taking a deep exhale out from the mouth. Starting to feel your feet on the earth and your seat underneath you. If you happen to be walking, you can feel the ground beneath your feet. Taking another deep breath, listening to the inhale, filling your ribs, your belly, your chest. And a big exhale, big sigh out. Let's do one more like that. Deep breath in, maybe the deepest, slowest breath of your day. And a big, long exhale out. We take a moment to acknowledge the miracle of our existence and our presence and our breath, because we are unlikely occurrences. It's said that the chances of you being born are 1 in 400 trillion. So pause for just a moment and let that sink in. That to sit right where you're sitting, to have walked in the places you've walked, to have seen that blooming flower, that perfect sunrise, to bump shoulders with a stranger that became your friend, to be here right now, knowing what you know, seeing what you've seen, loving who you love. The odds are nearly impossible. And in the previous 12 generations, you needed over 4,000 ancestors. So imagine just for a moment their lifetimes and experiences, their chance encounters, tragedies, challenges, love stories, all of which took place so that you could be sitting right here, breathing, reflecting on your extraordinary existence. Each one of us is a unique reflection of these experiences, lessons, stories, lives of generations past. These are the caretakers, the family members, the friends, the teachers, the communities that helped shape who we are today. They are your inheritance, and you are their legacy. So wherever you are, whatever you came here with, whatever might be present for you in this moment, remember that you are an unlikely occurrence, sharing space with equally unlikely miracles. on a precious blue planet in an unfathomably large universe, leading a miraculous and improbable existence. Taking one more breath, deep breath in, and a deep breath out. And I invite you to take any other movements, maybe any shakes or wiggles that your body might want to shake out. And when you come back to our virtual space, I invite you to share one word in the chat about how you're feeling right now after that brief visual journey. So I'm seeing grateful, relief, curious, abundance, connected, odd, beautiful. One, please keep sharing whatever has come up for you in this moment. And as I started talking about before, today we're going to explore how the behavioral patterns we inherited from our caretakers, from our cultures of origin, influence the way that we handle conflict and communicate both in our work, in our personal lives. And this is really just an introduction because these skills are an art, not a science, and they require practice. So if you're interested in continuing your learning after this, we're going to share some links with you about how you can do that and have a much deeper, longer drop in with me and this work. And what I'd like to really start with, as always, is defining a term. So what do we mean when we say conflict for the purposes of this session? Because conflict can be defined so many different ways. So for the purposes of what we're exploring today, conflict is defined as a struggle resulting from opposing needs, drives, wishes, or demands. And conflict is an essential component to constructive change. And yet, so many people inherit limiting beliefs and patterns related to conflict that prevent them from meaningful advocacy, from effective communication, and not just building, but actually tending and caring for our relationships, especially across lines of difference. And I'm talking to you about conflict because it has been such a present part of my entire life story. So I shared my name is Katya Stepanov, but I was actually born Yekaterina Olegovna Stepanova. That is my real birth name. I was born in Minsk, Belarus, 4 days after the Soviet Union completely collapsed. So I was born into conflict in so many ways, into chaos, right? Like no papers, being written into my mom's passport, coming to the US as Jewish refugees. You see that my first form of ID said resident alien on it, which is definitely how I felt when I arrived in the United States and for a lot of my life. And because I was an immigrant, I am an immigrant, and my family came here without a lot of support, my parents dealt with a lot of stress and conflict in my early years. And they did not have very many tools to regulate their nervous systems, to model healthy conflict for me. I grew up in a house where there was really no space or time for managing feelings or anything like that. Everything was very explosive. There was a lot of rage. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of modeling of toxic and unhealthy conflict. And so I really learned a lot of avoidance techniques of how to avoid conflict at all costs. If this is resonating for you, let me know by dropping a 1 in the chat. Maybe you also grew up in a house where there was a lot of conflict. And so conflict really brings up some strong memories and feelings for you. So yeah, I see that I'm not alone. I would say that it's really rare for people to have healthy conflict modeled for them. And that's what we're here learning so that we can be that example for the people in our care, for our future generation. So people can inherit a new way of relating from us, right? And I co-founded Inheritance Project because I found that this lens of investigating our inherited behavioral patterns and where they come from and where they originate is so often overlooked in both our personal environment, our professional environment, while we simultaneously ask people to collaborate, right? Who all have all different types of inheritances, all different types of inherited conflict reactions without having any real explicit conversation about any of these things. And so this is why bringing this conversation to the forefront for a moment and actually asking ourselves, what did I inherit, from my family? So I am living with complex PTSD as the result of my childhood. It's something I grapple with all the time. And these tools have helped me so much to transform conflict from something that my body shuts down. I can't even engage in it. I want to run away from it. It reminds me of all these horrible things, to an opportunity, like seeing an opportunity, knowing how to regulate my nervous system, and actually being able to engage in conflict without defaulting to a survival response, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's a really short overview of my life story. There's a lot more that I'm happy to share with you. And if you want to hear more, you can, of course, connect with me. But what I'll say is, we all have inherited patterns from our culture. I inherited the post-Soviet pattern of how to deal with conflict, and that's what I've been unlearning, but we each have our own version of that. So you're here to explore your own. I'm not here to tell you how to think, what to think. It's all about your self-exploration. And so as we start to explore this, what we'll start to see is that when we're in conflict, and what we can observe about other people, especially when we're having difficulty communicating with someone, we're responding to a specific behavior that we're experiencing. And the reality is that the behavior that we're experiencing is only what we can see on the surface. And underneath all of that are all of the root causes of that behavior: thoughts, beliefs, emotions, values, stories, and needs, all the things that we cannot see just from observing the behavior that someone is exhibiting, right? So how do we get underneath the behavior, both for ourselves and our own behavior in conflict and someone else's? So these are some of the tools that you can use to do that. There are 7 skills. Today we're going to look at the first 4, but I'll read them all to you just so you have an awareness of all 7. And you're going to get the slides too if you want to look at this later, dive more into it. We'll also give you a free guide to looking at each of these skills that you can use anytime and read anytime. So the first skill is pause and breathe. And we're going to unpack that and understand why this is the most important skill to learn when we're navigating conflict. We did some of it already live in the session, and people were responding, I feel more calm, I feel more grounded. Breathwork is one of the best tools that we can use in regulating our nervous system and maintaining our abilities during conflict. The second skill is noticing our assumptions and stories. So we're going to play a game to look at that deeper today. The third is leading with curiosity. The fourth, receiving and acknowledging the other person and what they've shared. The fifth skill is naming what's in the space, which is a beautiful tool, can be used proactively, retroactively, really at any point. And what we always say is, these are not a sequential, like do this in this sequence skill set. You can mix and match. However, pause and breathe is always first. That's always the first step. That's what we're going to talk about first. But afterwards, it's up to you how you want to mix and match and use these skills. The sixth is communicating your needs and requests. And of course, I would say the seventh is finding common ground. That tends to be where we end up when we use all of these skills in the right way. So let's look at the first skill, pause and breathe. And drop a 1 in the chat if you find conflict stressful or get anxious before a hard conversation. Yeah. This is an experience that many of us can empathize with. And what you might experience, here are some descriptions of what is called the sympathetic state. You might experience shortness or quickening of breath, an elevated heart rate, sweating or feeling hot, tightness in our chest and stomach, racing thoughts. So those are some things that you might be able to identify when you are either in an escalating conflict or conflict breaks out around you, right? Or you're in direct relationship with conflict. What's happening on the physiological level is that your body is releasing stress hormones into your bloodstream, adrenaline and cortisol, reducing blood flow and activity to the prefrontal cortex, which we're going to talk about why that's so important, and also reducing blood flow and energy to the digestive system, which is often why we can't eat when we're anxious or stressed out. And this, the sympathetic state, is what happens to us when we enter a survival mode. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of our mind that is responsible for creative problem solving, for empathy, for logic, and for creativity and collaboration. All of the skills we need to navigate conflict, we lose access to when our body enters a physiological survival state. And what's interesting about this is we may enter this state when we're in a real danger situation, like there's really our life's in danger, our bodies are having this reaction, and that's an appropriate reaction to have in that situation. However, what we perceive as dangerous to us is on a really wide spectrum. Sometimes we may find ourselves having this reaction simply because someone is disagreeing with us about something, but maybe that is making us feel in danger for some reason, right? So here are the 4 survival reactions that we might experience when our body enters a sympathetic state. We will usually default to one of these 4 most common reactions. There are others as well. So I want you to take a moment and look at this. You might enter fight, which is raising your voice, interrupting, making sure your point is heard. I definitely inherited a fight response from growing up in a very conflict-heavy household. I also developed a flight response in certain situations, right? Running away from the danger, avoiding responding to the email that seemed aggressive, etc. There's freeze, which is being frozen, not knowing how to move or act. So for example, observing a conflict in a meeting, but you don't know how to intervene, you don't know what to say, you feel frozen in place. Or fawning, which is placating others just to avoid conflict. So agreeing to take on additional tasks, even though you don't have capacity, jumping in to say you're right, or I'm sorry, or, I'm just gonna like agree with you so I can get out of this. That would be a fawn reaction. So if you're not sure what your default state or conflict style is, just ask your best friends because they know. They know, they'll probably be able to help you see what they observe, right? But likely you also have different reactions based on different contexts, right? So maybe I default to fawning in a work-related conflict, but I default to fighting in a personal conflict. So we may have different default reactions in different contexts. And also, we all have a different inheritance and a unique conflict style and unique context that we learned to survive in our childhood. So this is why our inheritance is so important and why understanding our unique background is so important when we're talking about conflict. So the good news about all of this is the power of breath. I see a question, would crying fit into one of these? Actually, crying is often the end of a stress cycle in the nervous system. So sometimes you'll find like right as soon as you like kind of land from an experience, you might experience a really strong emotional outburst. I would say if I was going to put crying in any of these, it would probably be in flight or in freeze or in fawn. But crying is a physiological reaction as well that tells us that something's going on that we need to investigate in ourselves, right? So here is the power of breath and why breath is so, so, so important and why it's the number 1 skill. Because just 6 seconds of slow, deep breathing will begin to shift your nervous system out of a sympathetic state or survival state into a parasympathetic state. And that's because breath is one of the only ways that we can communicate consciously with our vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve is connected from the base of our spine all the way to every single organ. My cat agrees as well. He also has a vagus nerve. So breath is one of the only functions in the body that happens consciously and unconsciously. It is the remote control of our nervous system. So if you're going to take one thing away from this field trip, it's that my breath and my breath pattern is the remote control of my nervous system. So if you learn how to use this tool in an escalating situation and start to regulate your nervous system, you're going to navigate conflict so much more efficiently because you'll keep access to your prefrontal cortex. So when our nervous systems are regulated, we have access to the part of our brain that can problem solve and be creative and collaborate and empathize with other people. So it's really about us being first aware that we're in an activated state. If we are, to actually give ourselves the space to pause and to breathe and to come back to a regulated state before we continue engaging with whatever it is in our environment that has provoked us into this nervous system response. So we're going to practice a really quick breath practice. I'll give you this tool. This is my favorite pattern. This pattern will ask you to practice something called breath retention, which is also known as holding your breath. If you have never held your breath for 7 seconds before, it might feel a little weird. That's totally normal. If at any point it's too weird for you, just go back to your normal breathing pattern and know that if you do return to this and try to practice it, the initial feelings of discomfort will go away. It's like going to the gym, except for breathing. So this breath pattern is called 4-7-8. And it's that simple. We breathe in for 4 counts, we hold the breath for 7 counts, and we exhale for 8 counts. And this breath pattern is used in many training programs around being in high stakes environments, because this breath pattern will start to regulate our nervous system, even if we're under extreme duress. So this is also a great tool for you if you do find yourself panicking, right? This is a great breath practice to bring your nervous system back into regulation. So let's try just 3 rounds of this together. I invite you to sit up tall in your seat, to feel your feet on the floor again. If it helps to close your eyes, you're welcome to do that, but you don't have to. And first, let's just empty out our breath with like, shh. Then we'll breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Slow exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In again for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Awesome. If you noticed any subtle changes in your body, you're welcome to drop them in the chat. The other really simple version of this is simply make your exhales longer than your inhales. So if you are in an escalating situation, you're like, I can't remember the numbers, can't remember the breath pattern right now, just lengthen your exhales longer than your inhales, and already that will start to send signals to your mind. We're safe, we're okay. A bear is not running at us. So all of this comes with the caveat that if a bear is running at you, please default to your survival reaction. Please do flee or fight or go into an appropriate response, because that is a life-threatening situation. But next time you find your heart pounding because someone's disagreeing with you, that is a great moment to lengthen your exhales and keep your prefrontal cortex online. So that's why pause and breathe is one of the most essential skills, the number 1 skill. Imagine how many conflicts would have been avoided if you didn't send the angry email back or react in the moment that you felt activated, right? So this is, I hope that you'll take away from this next time you get that angry email and you feel the heart rate rising, that you give yourself a moment to pause and to breathe and to really bring yourself back from the activated state into a state where you can consider what you want to do next. So the second skill, noticing assumptions and stories, we're going to understand this skill through a game called What Do You See? So this is my favorite part. It's going to require your participation. I'm going to ask you to write things in the chat. The purpose of this game is to do a very, very hard thing with our brains, which is recognize the difference between a neutral observation and a story. This is incredibly hard because our brains are meaning-making machines. We are designed to make up stories about the world around us. It's how we survive. It's part of what we need to do in certain situations so that we can know how to appropriately behave. So we can all accept that story making and storytelling is not bad or wrong. It's something we're all doing all the time. So how do we train ourselves to tell the difference between a neutral observation and a story? So in this game, we're going to start with stories. I'm going to show you an image on the slide, and I want you to write in the chat all the stories your brain can make up about what's going on in the situation. Okay. And I want you to be as creative as possible. Like, what are all the possible things that could be going on in the situation? Mundane, far-fetched. Let's just see the diversity of all the stories that we can create. And then when we go through it a second time, we're going to try to make neutral observations only. And that will take a little bit of practice. And what will happen is if I notice that during the neutral observation section, you are writing a story, I will call it out. I'll say, that's a story. Let's rephrase this as a neutral observation. Okay. So does this make sense to everyone? Questions about this game before we start? Okay, awesome. So we're going to start here. Please write what's going on here. What's the story? What's happening? Two friends are catching up. Great. This is an interview. The girl in the blue is interviewing for a job. Girl in the pink is not pleased. Okay, first date. Boss and employee having a discussion. A layoff conversation. These are great, but still pretty safe. What else could be happening? Okay, girl in blue is firing the girl in pink. A discussion between two colleagues, delivering unfortunate news. Someone stole the other one's lunch. The woman on the left is of higher status. I love that story because one of the things I'll ask is who has the power in this situation? So what do you think? Who has the power in this situation? So just fun to see, right, how we're going to answer. We have girl on the right, then we have no, person in blue. Okay, a lot of people agreeing to that. Someone else says the person not talking has the power. Love it. Okay, awesome. Thank you. What about here? What's going on here? So these will get more complex, these images. Mansplaining, says Heather. Thank you. She is not happy. Unrelatable. Oh my God, he's droning on again. Okay, what else could be happening? The guy standing up is a tyrant and no one likes him. Too difficult to tell. Okay, let's see. It's the end of a quarter meeting. The team did not meet their goals. This is a pitch meeting and everyone has horrible ideas. This isn't a dysfunctional team. Love this. There's a problem at work and they can't find a solution. A messy brainstorming. I love Christina. I've heard it all before. Okay, what else could this be? Anyone have a totally different story? Great, I love that, Heather. She came to work with a hangover. Totally different story, right? Girl in the white has had enough. Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. He just stole her idea. Okay, so see, here are all of our interpretations of what could be going on in this scene just from one still image. What about here? What's happening here? What's the story? I love the first one. She is mind reading. I haven't heard that one before. That's great. They're breaking up. Francisco says she hates his outfit. This is a marital fight. This workplace tries to be less corporate by not wearing ties with their blazers. That's hilarious. Can't deal with the shenanigans anymore. Alexia says she just discovered infidelity. Amanda says she's pregnant and he's broke. Renee says the dog peed on the carpet again. Like that one. They got bad news. They're fighting about money. So, wow, see how many different directions our brains can take one image, right? Just something that we might see and think, oh, everyone would think that. Or I know what the story is here. It's this, right? Great. Good job on the storytelling. Give yourself some confetti. A little round of applause. Now we're going to go back through and try to make neutral observations only. Okay. This is one of the more challenging things we're going to ask our brains to do. So let's start with this image. What are the neutral observations that you can make about the image that you see? Okay, so I have here, the chairs are white and green. Yes, that's great. That's a neutral observation. Two people having a conversation. Okay, conversation could be story, but I'll accept it. Then we have two women speaking with each other. So I will pause there and say women is a story. We actually do not know how these people identify until we ask them. So this is one of the key storytelling conclusions we jump to is gender, but we actually cannot know what someone's gender is until they tell us. So people is neutral observation, woman would be story. They know each other in some ways, a story, but we have two people sitting at a table in front of a window in a city conversing. Yes, thank you. Those are neutral observations. What else can we see in this image? It's a city. New York would be a story. I would say, yes, I see buildings outside of the window if I want it to be really neutral. And then we have, okay, so this is interesting. Left one is tense, right one looks exposing. So here's something I'm going to point out to you. It's not that you can't observe the gestures in a non-neutral way, but what makes you say they're tense? Like, what would the neutral observation be? For example, one person has their hands clasped is a neutral observation that then makes me think something because of it. Closed jaw, that's great. Also, they're BIPOC, great. Angela, yes. They're both wearing sweater-looking tops, that works. The hands tell a story. Yeah, so exactly. The way that our hands are moving is what the neutral observation is. The story is what we create out of it. So I could, if I wanted to take it farther, I would say that the person on the right has their mouth open as if, the period, has their mouth open. I don't even know why, right? So conversation would even be a story because this is a still image. So I know it's challenging. Let's go on to the next one. It's going to get a little more challenging. What are the neutral observations that we can actually make about the scene that we're seeing? So I'm not telling you not to describe people's physical gestures, but can you describe them in a neutral way? So we have there are 5 people at a table, no eye contact. Yes, you're getting it. This is great. Only one person is standing is a neutral observation. There are lots of materials everywhere. Seated guy, again, I will say guy is a story. We see, okay, workers in a workplace is also a story, but we can say we see people and we can describe their clothing and we can describe what they're doing. Person in the middle is holding their head. I would even get even more specific about that, right? Person in the middle has their pointer finger on their temple with their elbows on the table and their head in their hands. Those are all neutral observations. My mind then is going to make up a story about why that's happening. Let's see. There are charts and graphs. There's a beverage. What are we not naming? Just scrolling through. These are good. Is there anything else that we're not naming? Facial expressions are different. Some focused on speaker, some not. This is good. What about one person is black? Yes, thank you for we hesitate to observe skin color. That's a good observation, right? So we can observe skin color without making a story up about what someone's race is. Again, race would be how they identify themselves, but we can make observations about skin color, right? So this is an important distinction. Great. Okay, last one. You're really getting the hang of it. Good job. How can we make some neutral observations about this last image? There's a plant on the shelf. Good start. 2 people not making eye contact. Also good. Yes, one person is sitting, one is standing. 2 people are looking at the floor. One person has dreads. There's distance between them. That's a great neutral observation. They're looking away from each other. So yeah, so see how we can still describe what we're seeing in a neutral way. So I'm going to drop the slides now. Give yourself a round of applause again for playing this game. It's not an easy game to play. And I'm curious, what are you learning from this game? Who will be brave and come off mute or share in the chat? What are you learning from this game? From what do you see? Or you can observe what you've observed. Okay, I see some things in the chat. I see that we make a lot of assumptions. Yes, we make a ton of assumptions when we take in a scene. Absolutely. I make a lot of assumptions. I make a lot of assumptions too. It's hard not to tell stories and then believe in them. Yes, Amy, yes. It's really hard to make neutral observations, but slowing down and studying the images for a little longer helps. Absolutely. We all have stories in our heads a lot. So, what I'll invite you to observe too is, where are our stories coming from? Why do we have the stories that we have? Who can take a guess? So I see biases from our life experiences. Yeah, we make a lot of projections when looking at others, our culture, our background, our inheritance. So a lot of the stories that we make up come from our inherited worldview. What we experienced, what we were taught, what we watched, what we read, what we listened to. That is what colors the stories that we create about other people. This is why investigating what are the stories that we make up the most often will be a huge breakthrough for you in navigating conflict. Because when does this really escalate? In conflict. We are, yes, telling ourselves stories about other people day to day when we're passing them in the street, but I bet, how many of you have a really strong story about a person that you're in conflict with? Drop a one in the chat. They don't care about me, they're lazy, they, etc. And oh, someone says, can I speak instead of type my response? Yes, please, Ash, come off mute and share with us.
Just asked you to unmute, Ash. You should
There
see
we go.
that.
Okay. Yeah, so I just thought it'd be easier, but and I don't mean to be the devil's advocate. I might be like stepping into it, but I feel like society, I mean, I was just taught to read body language as a form of also disrespecting people's boundaries too. So maybe I'm splitting hairs or um over, interpreting this wrong, but I guess I feel like I'm being asked, I can't read body language, I can't make inferences, which I feel like is kind of a form of intelligence. So like what's the difference there when
Yeah,
you're in a
this is a great question.
situation?
This is a great question. Thank you so much for asking it, because you are absolutely empowered to observe people's body language. In fact, that is a form of intelligence. But the conclusion we jump to around someone's body language might be wrong. That's what this game is illuminating for us. So we might see someone with their head in their hands and be like, oh, they're having a terrible day. But maybe it was just they have a headache, or it's some they just heard some bad news, or it's something else that we actually don't know. So we're filling in the blanks. And really why we want to illuminate this is not because we want to just not find out that information, but it's because we actually want to lead with curiosity to find out why were they doing that. So I might come up to that person, and instead of assuming they're sad, jumping to a behavior to try to like make them feel better, I might say, hey, I noticed that you were holding your head in your hands. What's going on? And then they have an opportunity to tell you, yeah, I just got some terrible news, or I have a headache, or whatever it is. But so often we think, oh, I'm just reading their body language, and we're jumping to conclusions about their body language that may not actually be true. Does that make sense? So it's about checking ourselves that, what if I'm wrong about this? Because so often when we come into a situation being like, what I experienced is the only truth, my story is true, I was reading their body language, I know what was going on, then we don't leave room for the other person's experience and what might be revealed to us underneath the behavior we saw, right? Head in the hands, crossed arms, that's the behavior. But underneath that is everything that was going on in that graphic, right? Maybe some unknown thoughts or needs or something else that was going on that I just don't have conscious knowledge of. So this is about shifting from feeling the pressure all the time to know everything. Like, constantly feeling like I have to know how everyone in my environment is doing, to empowering myself to make observations, because observations are essential, right? Make observations. I'm definitely encouraging you to do that. But how can I catch myself when my observation turns into a story? And if I can practice that awareness, that's going to give me a whole new doorway that I can walk into of curiosity. Because if I don't know, then I get to be curious. But if I think I know, then there's no curiosity, right? Does that make sense? So I think I think this is such a good question. Thank you so much for asking that. All right, I'm going to move on and I'm going to just summarize, right? So I'm going to summarize that making pure observations. Wow, don't know what's going on with my hand. There we go. All right. Making pure observations is really difficult. It's really hard because we defer to making up stories. This happens all the time. And other people are likely also making up stories about us in conflict, right? Like this is what happens. We think we're the storyteller, but guess what? Someone else has a story of that time that you did this one thing and they like made up a whole story about it that you don't know. And they might be basing how they behave towards you or how they respond to you from the story that they told themselves and not from the reality of your experience. Right? So this is about extending it to the other person as well. And our stories are often stronger when we're emotional. We get more attached to them because it helps us make sense of our emotions. So it's true, making assumptions and stories, it's a function of our brain. It helps us survive in a lot of situations, but it can also trip us up to misinterpret a situation, stop us from being curious, right? So I invite you to play this game with yourself, like at different moments in your life. Maybe you're riding the subway in New York and you're like, let me try to make some neutral observations about this car and then notice the stories I've made up about all these people from like 5 seconds of observing them and just do it with a sense of humor, right? Because we're all doing it. So I've yet to meet someone who's like, I never make up stories about anyone else. If you are someone who is super practiced at constantly observing the world through a neutral lens, I would love to hear from you. But it's a practice, right? It's like something that we have to practice all the time. And that's why it's so great when we can practice this skill with other people. And when we can actually own it and be like, hey, the story I'm making up about this situation is XYZ. Like, can you tell me if it's true or not? You know, now we get to lead with curiosity. So that's going to be the next skill that I'm going to talk about, the last skill that we have time for today. And there's, of course, so many more. So my recap, right? All we see is the behavior. We're making stuff up about everything underneath. So how do we learn what is going on? We get to lead with curiosity. So let's say I'm in a conflict. I observed a behavior. Let's say someone cut me off in a meeting. Okay, I'm going to use a really simple example. And perhaps it's not the first time. So maybe I have a story that this person never listens to me and they don't think what I have to say is important. And I do my work. I feel my activation. I breathed. I've regulated myself. I asked myself what actually happened. And my neutral observation is I was speaking and this person interrupted me. And then I can see, okay, the story I'm telling myself is that they don't care what I have to say. So what are some questions I would ask them? I would actually ask them, hey, do you remember that when I was speaking and you interrupted me the other day? What was going on for you in that situation? Tell me more. So I've actually had this exact conversation with a friend who then revealed to me, oh my God, I was just so excited about what you were sharing. I didn't even realize that I was interrupting you, right? And they got to share their experience with me. It was like 5 seconds and we avoided maybe a much greater conflict than what actually arose because I took the time to ask the question, right? And actually be brave and say, what happened here? Tell me about your experience. So in the book Nonviolent Communication, Marshall B. Rosenberg writes, empathy is a respectful understanding of what others are experiencing. And instead of offering empathy, we often have a strong urge to give advice or reassurance or to explain our own position or feeling. And empathy actually calls us to empty our mind and listen to the other person with our whole being. So this is why once we acknowledge, like, here are the stories I have about this person, but how can I put that away for a moment? If I really want a chance at building a bridge with somebody that's wronged me or I am in conflict with, I need to give space to learn all the information underneath the behavior so I can get a full picture of what actually happened and not just the story I told myself about what happened. These are just some great words to use. Tell me more about this. What was your experience of that situation that occurred, right? Or I'd love to understand your perspective. These are some great phrases that you can use, but I'm not telling you to just use these. Please speak in your own organic way, right? You will have your own way of asking questions. But what I will say is that there's a caveat. You know the difference, I believe you do, between asking a question thinking you already know the answer to it and asking a question genuinely with space to hear what the other person is going to say. So you know that distinction within yourself. Ask questions with real integrity, right? Because like Ash was pointing out, like body language is a huge part of it, right? If I want to really genuinely ask a question, I'm going to do it with open body language. And then the fourth tool is not just listening, but receiving and acknowledging what they say. So in my situation with my friend, if she said, well, I was just really excited and I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was interrupting you, I would say, okay, so let me make sure I understood you. So when you interrupt me, it's because you're excited. Am I getting that right? And then the other person has a chance to say, yeah. And even if I want to make a request, like, actually, it makes me feel really unheard when you interrupt me. Do you mind letting me finish before responding? That might be my specific request for making that relationship better. But just taking the time to understand why the behavior is happening is going to make that person so much more likely to actually meet me in the middle around a new way of relating, a new way that we can find common ground between your reality and my reality. How can we build that bridge? So some great tools for receiving and acknowledging what someone said is making eye contact. Maybe you need to even take notes if they're going on like a long monologue and you want to make sure you understood them correctly. And I love reflecting back with, okay, what I heard you say is, and synthesizing what I heard, understanding, distilling. You don't have to repeat back word for word, but what did I understand from what you just shared with me? And then asking, did I get that right? Because one of our favorite tools at Inheritance Project is remembering everyone speaks in draft. Like most of us don't speak in final draft. Sometimes we say something and then we're like, that's not exactly what I meant to say. So if somebody actually gives you the grace to say, okay, here's what I just heard from you, am I getting it right? Then you actually have a chance to say, no, actually, what I meant to say was this. And how great would that feel, right? So, how can you extend that to somebody else? Give them a chance to share more than just their first response with you. Ask more questions. Ask if you got it right, because so much of conflict happens because we've just misinterpreted something. We're both walking away from it, thinking totally different stories, and not actually having a space to understand each other's experience and reflect it back. So this is a skill you can also practice with your best friend. Next time they call you up and they're raving to you about something or ranting, great opportunity for you to not just go, uh-huh, yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you, but to say, okay, here's what I'm hearing. I heard that this happened, that you felt this way. I hear that you value this. I hear, right? Like reflect back to them what they actually said to you, because you're going to help them even see themselves more clearly and actually have a real dialogue about what's really, really going on. So this is one of the best active listening tools that I have in my toolbox. I use it all the time, especially when people are getting emotional or activated. I use it also to slow down the time and slow down the response. So before I jump to reaction to what they said, I actually take a moment to make sure I understood it correctly. Wow, what a profound hinge habit. So a hinge habit is like tiny hinge opens a whole new door, right? Hinge habit, it happens right in that moment that I take a moment to pause, to slow down, to reflect back what I'm hearing and to make sure I'm hearing correctly. And the way that that person is responding to me will shift in that moment. So this was my crash course in the first 4 of the 7 skills. There's so many more, but I want to close with inviting you to actually take a moment to reflect on a recent conflict for yourself. So if you have pen, paper, notebook, I recommend that you grab that. And I'm going to play a little bit of music. If you don't like music while you're writing, feel free to mute and we can tell you when the writing period is over. It's just going to be 5 minutes. But what I'd love is for you to reflect on a recent conflict. What happened? Identify the sequence of events as you remember it and everyone that was involved. Identify what behaviors provoked you and be specific. So, neutral observation, not like they communicated poorly, but what did they actually say, if you can remember? What are the specifics of what actually happened? And then, what's the story that you have about the situation and the people involved? Can you start to separate out neutral observation from story? And maybe closing the reflection with a few questions that you might actually ask them. And maybe you won't get a chance to do that, but even for yourself, what are the questions that you would ask this person if you had the chance and the opportunity to understand what happened more fully? All right, I'll give you a few minutes and then I'd love to hear what's clicking for you. Right, you have about a minute to wrap up your writing. Maybe this is a good time to just review what you wrote, highlight anything that stands out to you, allow yourself to complete your thought. All right. So I encourage you to continue writing about this. If this has gotten you going and you're having insights, please, after the session, go back and keep writing about it. Stream of consciousness writing is one of the best ways for us to understand what's going on under our conscious level of thinking about a situation. So, also a great tool for you to keep in your back pocket. And I do see a bunch of great questions, but first, I just want to leave a little space to hear from someone if anyone has had like an insight, right? Or an aha moment that took place during the session or during their writing. I'd love to hear from you.
And folks, feel free to jump in the chat and say me or put your virtual hand up and I can get you unmuted to ask that, reflect with that.
And you don't have to share the personal details of your conflict, but anything that you learned.
Sometimes we want to share, but we're feeling a little bit nervous to do so. So if you've got butterflies in your tummy thinking this thing's on the tip of my tongue, just know that this is a very supportive community. And that might mean you're feeling called to share. So if you just needed that little bit of encouragement, I wanted to invite you. Oh, it looks like Veronica put one in the chat, Katya.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yes, Veronica, thank you. Neutral observations can avoid so much unnecessary conflict. I saw a question earlier too that was like, what if a lot of the things you think are conflicts are not conflicts at all? Story of my life. So much like overinterpretation from me, right? I've had so many times where like what we were talking about, Ash, where I've perceived someone's body language and I'm like, they hate me. And then I actually ask them outright, like, hey, I noticed that you were doing this when we were hanging out, like what was going on for you? And they tell me something totally irrelevant to me, totally different from what I was expecting. And I realized that, oh, I was just making that story up. So that's one way to resolve a lot of like things before they become a conflict. I see here, I learned that they didn't actually do anything to wrong me. Ooh, it was just my story about not being considered. Wow, that's a big revelation, Amy. Thank you for sharing that. And that's a great opportunity if you ever wanted to revisit that, to have a dialogue with that person. I see conflicts can be avoided with more genuine conversations and an open mind. And then questions as well about, oh yeah, so difficult to be neutral the closer someone is. Oh, yes. So these are skills that are great to practice with the easy rounds. Like I would say there are levels of like in a video game, like different levels, right? Some of the easier ones to tackle, and that's where I would say start using these tools, is like small misunderstandings, right? That might turn into bigger conflicts. As you learn to use the skills, you'll get better and better and better at it and be able to tackle some of the bigger, more challenging conflicts. It's like the quote, I don't remember who said it, but like, you think you're enlightened, go spend a day with your family. Definitely that will bring up the most intense reactions because it's where our inheritance was forged, right? So it will take more practice to maybe do this differently. But what I will tell you, and I will answer some of these questions, is it only takes one person to change a pattern. Just one. If you change, the pattern will change. If you pause and breathe when you didn't pause and breathe before, already that's going to be a huge change to the outcome, to the relationship, to the way that the pattern repeats itself. So you have the power. You are the interrupter, the one who can say, actually, I'm going to learn how to handle this differently. And if this is speaking to you and you're like, I want to learn to be this person, I want to have that be possible for you. So we are going to drop some links in the chat of the Bridge Builders course, which I go in depth into each of the 7 skills. It's a 7-week course. We spend a week on each skill. You're with a cohort of people all working on their real life conflicts, really the things that they're struggling with now. It's like usually a room of strangers who become really good friends, people that you can really practice this with in a safe way, because these are relational skills. So we do need to practice them in relationship. We can't practice these skills alone in our room or from reading a textbook. We just really can't. We have to practice them with real breathing individuals. So we do that in the course by doing it in a safe space with people who aren't related to us at all and aren't related to our conflict and can actually practice these different, what I heard you say, all these different skills. So I really encourage you, if you're interested, to look into it. You will also get, I'll make sure I send to Lauren, there's a guide that we have about the 7 skills. So at minimum, you can get access to that and the slides. And someone asked if I could share some of the researchers or theories that have informed this teaching, and there are so many. So I'm just going to list 3 because there are so many more. And if you do take the course, there are additional resources every single week that you can dive deeper into. So the first is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg. I think it's an incomplete approach to conflict resolution, but parts of that book are really great, especially around specific requests, making specific requests and how to find common ground with people. So we pull a lot from that research in this course. Sustained dialogue is another methodology that we heavily draw from, which is used in helping groups of people who are in historic conflict with one another actually start to find common ground. And it is rooted in deep listening. So a lot of the deep listening practices and the humanizing, repeating back, all of these different techniques come from the world of sustained dialogue. And then extensive research into the nervous system and into breath practices from all different traditions, both from the world of neuroscience to Himalayan Kriya Yoga tradition. We have a wide range of breath practices that you can draw from because everyone's different and different things resonate with different people. But the world of breath, I mean, if you want to go down the research rabbit hole, I highly encourage you to do it because it's one of the best skills you can learn just for your life, conflict or not, to help you regulate your body and your nervous system. So I'm going to answer that. The person who's asking me about a really complex scenario, please write me a message or write me an email and come take the course so we can really unpack that in depth. I won't be able to answer that. But I will look at one question before we close. Is the goal to avoid conflict entirely? Absolutely not. The goal is to engage in conflict in an effective way from a place of emotional and nervous system regulation, where you can actually really resolve conflict rather than being in that fawn state or freeze state or any of these reactions that we might default to, which will usually not help us resolve a conflict if we are engaging in that way. So it is definitely about seeing conflicts as opportunities to practice these skills. Now I get excited whenever conflict comes my way. I mean, a huge shift from how I used to be. I used to be very afraid of it, and now I'm not at all. Now I seek it. I'm like, do you have an issue you want to clear with me? Let me know, because then I can practice more listening, truly, and I can learn how you see the world differently from me, and I can realize that we can find common ground. I don't need to win, or you don't need to. This is not a zero-sum game. This is about how we build a bridge and realize we're all on the same team around certain things that we may not see that we're on the same team about because we didn't do our research and be accountable for the way we showed up. So I have had such a good time sharing with you. I wish I could hear from every single one of you and learn all of your stories. And I hope that I get to. So please reach out to me if this resonated with you. Follow us, join our mailing list, learn about the course. You have all the links and all of the tools available to you. And if you want to take the course but are struggling for any reason, we also have scholarships. And please just apply. Let us know if you want to be there. We want you there. So thank you so much. I pass it back to you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Katya. That was amazing. Wow, what an incredibly valuable hour and 15 minutes we just spent together. That was just awesome. Folks, I've shared all of those links that Katya mentioned in the chat, but all the love that's pouring in, I'm just going to re-share them in case you lost them in there and didn't get a chance to grab those links and things. But Katya, we are so grateful for your time tonight, for you today, for me, wherever in the world everyone's joining from. Thank you for bringing this to Field Trips. And at Field Trips, some of you are already automatically doing it, but we like to practice a little gratitude protocol in the form of a chat waterfall. So in the chat, I invite everyone just to share one thing you're taking away from the field trip today. So maybe it's just one word. Maybe it's what you learned, like Katya prompted you to. Maybe it's how you're feeling after sitting here with us. A word, a question, anything, and we'll just take a moment to take that in together before I close us out. Oh, these are awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing those. Keep them coming. Amazing. If you haven't already and you'd like to, you can save the chat. There's so much good stuff in there. So you can do that by clicking the 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I also shared a link in the chat that will also pop up when you exit the Zoom to share your feedback. We love your feedback. So that will be there for you. And in one more round of thank yous, let's get on the mic, y'all, and give Katya our best field trips thanks. Thank you so much, Katya. This was awesome. Thanks so much for bringing
Thank
this
you
to us.
so much.
Thanks,
Very much.
Katya. That's
Amazing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again, Katya. This is awesome. Thanks everyone for being here. We hope to see you at another field trip soon, and take care. I'm going to close this out in 3, 2, 1. Bye, everybody.